So a few questions. So one of the things that you describe so beautifully as one of the threads in his life is the psychological toll and burden for him of being an African American. Both the internalized racism, the external racism he felt, the shame for not doing anything for civil rights, the pressure from his dad to be, there was so much pressure. So within that context of his psychology, what message do you hope the film sends and to whom?
Well, I would say simply this. It's, being African American is very complicated. And the challenge was to show that he was just not a phenomenal tennis player, but he was a very complicated man, African American male, who struggled with lots of things as he evolved, both as not only as an athlete, but as a man African American. That's what I would say. Rex?
Yeah, for me, the takeaway with Arthur was always he was the guy that brought everybody to the table, and he was the peacemaker, he was the bridge, and as he said, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can, and that everybody has a voice, and everybody needs to use their voice, but it needs to be their own personal voice. So that was my takeaway for him.
Okay. So at a recent event this week, actually, Pete Nix, who's a documentary filmmaker, said, "We're all telling some version of our own story." So what aspects of Arthur's life or his choices resonate with each of you?
Well, being a guy who used to try to imitate his serve, is my friend Howard Irby out there tonight? He and I used to both imitate his serve when we were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And when I was 6 years old in 1968, I was at the match at the US Open Finals, by myself, which is a whole weird story. So yeah, Arthur is just someone that's always been in my thoughts, from a very, very young age. And I learned about South African apartheid through him, and I wound up going there in my 20s as a clueless photojournalist. So yeah, he's just always somebody that touched me in the way that he marched through the world.
Mm-hmm.
I would say for me, I grew up in the 60s. I was 18 years old when Dr. King was assassinated and Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. As an African American growing up in this country that tells you you're supposed to become part of the American melting pot, it was always this notion for me, like Arthur, to figure out who I was. It took me a while to understand that being African American was very important to my identity. And so when I watched this material, we were in the editing room, I realized, this goes back to who I am and how I evolved, and understanding the dynamics of what it meant to be an Arthur Ashe as opposed to being a Muhammad Ali or Harry Edwards as opposed to Bill Russell or Jackie Robinson. Mm-hmm. So it speaks to me in volumes about what it means to be African American in this country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Speaking of you just talked about the editing room. What kind of challenges, archival challenges, did you all have in telling this film? Because obviously so much of it is archival footage. What kind of challenges were there?
Well, I'm gonna go first. The biggest challenge when you're making these documentaries is to find material that will be fresh and new. Mm-hmm. And two things that Rex found was that audio that you hear from Arthur Ashe that was recorded when he did this book with Arnold Rampersad is just phenomenal. That's like gold because you're getting Arthur's inner thoughts, which is important. Yeah. The other challenge is when you're working on a documentary like this, you bring on an archival producer who can dig into the archives and find stuff that you've never seen before. But Rex found those home movies, right? You found that home movie stuff, right?
Yeah, the home movies and the tapes. So I spent about 3 weeks at the Schomburg Center up in Harlem, going through all 47 boxes of the Ashe family's archives, and I found this. Must have been about 1,000 pages of a transcription, and it was the audio tape interviews that the author Arnold Rampersad had done with Arthur for the famous book Days of Grace. And we took a chance, and we had two wonderful archival producers, Lizzie McGlynn and Hannah Shepard. Thank you so much. So Hannah...
Should give a really big round of applause.
Yeah. And they're like the unsung heroes of these archival documentaries. And Hannah reached out to Mr. Rampersad, and do you have those tapes possibly, sir? And he's like, I have no idea, but I'll go look in the attic. And then a few days later, he called us and he said, I found a box with 33 micro cassettes, and you can have them, But I also give a shout out to how, for me, this project kind of got started. I had done this film about Althea Gibson, and I got a call from a woman named Linda Zimmerman out of the blue that said, "Oh, I really like your Althea film. My father was a Life magazine, Sports Illustrated photographer, and he spent a week with Arthur during the '68 U.S. Open, and we have 41 rolls of film that nobody's ever seen before." And at the beginning, I still said no. I just came off the Althea film. But she sent me those contact sheets, and I kind of fell in love with that moment. And for a while, we were really concentrated on 1968, but then it kind of branched out. And I got to think, with the archival, we had so much at a certain point with those 30 hours of tape. So big props to Sam, who like weeded through it all. And I fell in love with so many things that didn't make it in. And we still joke about, you know, I wanted more tennis and this and that. So yeah, it's a lot of tough choices, and you have to kill some of your darlings to get the thing over the finish line. So it was great to sort of hand off to the wise man here. Thank you.
What particular darling comes to mind that you had to kill off?
Oh, the Ecuador Davis Cup scene of 1965 when Arthur lost and said it was his most painful loss ever, yet he was trying to change the country with his social activism, but he was still proud to represent the country.
Mm-hmm. And also hard road to glory too, man, right?
Yeah. Arthur wrote over 5 years and spending $400,000 of his own money and a team of researchers. They wrote a 3-volume set of the history of the black athlete called The Hard Road to Glory. And that's phenomenal achievement, but you only have 90 minutes. So
Right.
So go get that book. It's on eBay.
It's a great book too.
Yeah,
great book.
It's a three-volume set. It's like slavery times.
Yeah.
And the history of black athletics, recreation, and it's really powerful stuff, yeah.
So speaking of athletes, I know Jimmy Connors is still alive. I was dying for you to have interviewed him for this film. Like, what's up with that?
Oh, I tried.
What happened?
I had a whole relationship with his agent, Karen Happer, who was so helpful, and she was a big fan of Arthur's, and she was really trying. And then I wrote him this long note, and the first response was he didn't say no. So that was good.
Did he say yes?
He never said yes, so we never got Jimmy, but you know, he just doesn't.
And we tried a few more times after that, and he finally did say no.
Oh, we did actually say no.
No.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Because that to me was a glaring, I mean, that's just glaring.
We tried.
Not enough Johnny Mac can equal Jimmy Connors.
Yeah.
So you tried. Knowing Arthur the way you do now, however you feel like you know him, like what parts of the film do you think he'd be very proud of? And what parts of the film do you think he would not be too psyched about?
I don't know what kind of question that is. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want to read his mind. I mean, Rex may want to.
I'll try.
I won't.
I think Rex wants to try to read his mind. Sam does not want to.
The first thing that pops into my head is him talking about his mother, because that was just that always felt really special to me. And I think he would appreciate that, paying tribute to her the way we did. And what would he not be proud of? I think leaving out Hard Road to Glory.
Yeah. Okay. What else? I noticed, of course, that there's several reenactments in the film. I'm wondering, why did you think it was important to put reenactments in those particular places where you did? And like, what was your thought process around reenactments?
I can talk about orchestrating them, and Sam can talk about placement. But why? Because I'm a tennis geek, and I bought a ton of old cool stuff off of eBay. And we had world-class tennis players in that. I'll just say that for a second. Chris Eubanks was one of our tennis-playing actors, and he had a big win today. He's like about 150 in the world now. Jelani Sarr was our 15-year-old Arthur, who was like tapping out the dirt from his shoes, and that was shot at Dr. Johnson's actual backyard court. He's top 5 in the country in the 18 and unders. And the little kid that was hitting on the wall, he's about 9 or 10 now, and he's going to be a player. We'll see where it goes, but he's really into it, and it was really cool. He was someone that I had given lessons to, and I was like, this kid is going to be one of my Arthur Ashes. And in terms of where to put it, I defer.
Well, we thought it was a nice and sort of impressionistic approach to it, and we just felt that we wanted to sort of have it measured throughout the film, So we initially had a lot of it in, and then we pulled back, and we tried to just give it that feeling that Rex did, because Rex shot it. It really gives it sort of this quality that you're being taken back to this young Arthur.
Okay. So we have time for, I think, one question. I'm going to be very prescriptive about this. Please make it a question. Please make it a one-part question, not a two-part, and please don't make it a comment. The gentleman in the really cool hat over there. And I'll repeat it so that everyone can hear.
You won't need to. I first of all want to say thank you, and then second of all, how do you balance, since you forced me to make it a question, I wanted to just say
Thank you.
how do you balance as a filmmaker who has brands and all these responsibilities of walking that line that Arthur walked? What advice would you give to folk like myself to land the punch and also deliver on the job when it's not your own project, it's not your own studio, you don't have the production company saying, this is what I feel like doing. You have not a boss, but a client beholden to. Because we're in such a commercial world, how do you walk that line of making it commercially successful and brand acceptable, and also really being honest and true without being biased?
Well, this project is not one of those projects. So this was just a passion project all the way. And, you know, it was started independently, and then by the end, we had wonderful partners from CNN, and there was no problem there. They had the same thought that we did, to tell a good story and to tell Arthur's story, mostly in his words. So that exists a lot in our world, I guess, that of trying to make a living and make documentaries, but this wasn't one of those projects.
We have time for second question, actually.
I think you have it.
There are no Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm from St. Louis. What high school did he finish school?
What high school did he finish at?
I can't remember.
I don't know. Another question.
Wikipedia. Somebody, quick.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you think that your personal voices as directors of this film are going to affect how Arthur Ashe's story will be interpreted?
I would say simply this. If anyone knows my work, I'm always trying to look at the African American experience and complicate it so you see all shades of it. And that's what we try to do with this film. And to me, it just follows kind of the trajectory that I believe that I want to do as a filmmaker. I'll let Rex now have his.
Yeah, for me, it was to try to bring Arthur's voice out. I didn't really ever feel it was my voice so much, and that was why I fell in love with those tapes. And we had a lot of interview footage of other people telling stories of Arthur and all the same events, but we kept taking stuff out of other people because Arthur could tell it. So for me, it was trying to bring Arthur's voice out and then bring his story back out to the appropriate level of prominence. And as I would go through the world, I would often ask people, hey, you ever heard of Arthur Ashe? And it was always disconcerting. A lot of people just never heard of him. A lot of it age, above and below, but still, like, just a lot of people didn't know that. Oh, tennis, maybe? I don't know. So that was what my goal was.
So you've done 2 films now about African American tennis players, and I'm curious, as a white man, have you learned anything about yourself?
Well, my mom's Jamaican, and she's a brown-skinned woman, and the Althea Project started because of this photograph that I had of these 2 brown-skinned women in their tennis whites at the segregated Marion Tennis Club outside of Philly. And I've always gone through the world pretty much perceived as white, although I'm from Astoria, so I could pass for Greek, or if I go to Israel, I pass for Israeli. And then I had my ancestry done, so I'm 19% African. I don't know what it means, but it is what it is. So I think being a New Yorker from Queens, I just always felt more like a citizen of the world, like, this guy. And that's how I go through the world.
Okay. Are you standing up because we have to end? Yes, okay. Oh, yeah, that's a good question. When?
It's going to be in the spring of 2022.
No,
Aviva.
summer.
Oh, summer?
Yeah.
Summer of 2022, Aviva.
Right before the U.S. Open.
Do you know where?
Sorry?
Like, where can folks watch it?
HBO Max and CNN.
CNN first, and then HBO Max, and then before then, lots of festivals and community screenings, CNNfilms.com.
Or Citizen Ash, I'm sure you could Google it and find it there.
So before I go, when Rex was shouting out to folks.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
missed one
Couple-
person. Another wonderful editor, R.A. Fetty.
I'm so sorry to miss Fetty. And I forgot to mention my producing partner, Beth Hubbard, who toiled with me for 5 years. We went through it together, and that woman does not know how to quit. So thank you, Beth.
That's for sure.
Thank you all for coming. Have a good evening.